There is a story that in the year 1540, an Icelandic ship, blown off course, came to the cold shores of Greenland. The crew went ashore and searched a coast swallowed by tundra. They found abandoned stone buildings and the mummified body of a man in medieval clothing, a hood on his head, a worn knife clutched in his hand. There was no other sign of life anywhere. They recorded the death of the settlement and left. What they had found was the end of a whole European colony that had simply vanished. Greenland has swallowed newcomers like that again and again. So who does this frozen island really belong to? It is one of the strangest questions in history, because Greenland has been claimed, colonized, occupied, and offered up for sale over and over for 1,000 years by Norse settlers, by Danish kings, by American presidents, and more. And yet, almost none of them could ever truly hold it. The one constant, the people who actually endured on this island, spent most of that history treated as bystanders in a story about their own home. This is the strange history of who Greenland really belongs to. To understand the whole story, you first have to understand the island itself, because almost nothing about it is what it seems, starting with the name. Greenland is the largest island on Earth, though not quite as large as it looks, since the familiar Mercator map stretches everything near the poles. It is, for the most part, a single enormous sheet of ice, up to 3 kilometers thick, a living piece of the last ice age. In fact, if you stripped the ice away, the center of the island lies below sea level. So Greenland might not even be one island at all, but a ring of land around a hidden sea. With the interior buried in ice, life is only possible around the edges. But that edge is not small. The ice-free land alone is roughly the size of Germany, and the climate there is surprisingly mild. Warmed by the Gulf Stream, the capital's winters are gentler than much of Russia's. Stranger still, the island was once truly green. Tens of millions of years ago, before the ice came, Greenland had forests and animals. For a brief moment in its deep past, it actually earned its name. But by the time humans arrived, that green world was long gone, buried under ice. And that is the first of Greenland's many paradoxes. Its very name, the Green Land, is a kind of advertisement for a place that is almost entirely white. As we will see, that was very much the point, because the first people to give it that hopeful name were trying to sell it. And the first outsiders to try to make a home here were not who most people imagine. They were not Inuit. They were Norsemen. For most of human history, the open Atlantic was the edge of the world, a barrier no ancient or medieval ship could cross. But there was one crack in that wall. Look at a map, and a chain of islands runs northwest from Britain. The Shetlands, the Faroes, then Iceland, then Greenland. And beyond it, America. Island by island, the crossing breaks into short hops that a medieval ship could manage. And the greatest sailors of the age, the Norse, followed that chain west. The man who led them to Greenland was Eric the Red, and he did not go by choice. Eric came from a family with a talent for trouble. His father had been exiled from Norway for killing a man, and Eric, living in Iceland, followed the same path, drawn into a series of feuds and killings that ended with him being banished. Forced to leave Iceland, he sailed west toward a wild, empty land that sailors had glimpsed but never settled. Around the year 985, he founded a colony there. And here is where the name comes in. According to the sagas, Eric himself called the island Greenland, the Greenland, precisely because an attractive name would lure more settlers to follow him. It worked. But if you picture these colonists as horned Viking raiders, think again. They were not pirates. They were farmers and herders. And almost from the start, they were Christians. Within a decade, Eric's own son had brought a Catholic priest to the island, much to the annoyance of Eric, who remained a stubborn pagan to nearly the end of his life. The Christianity that took root here was a strange thing, shaped by a harsh land. There was so little bread and wine that the priests wrote to Rome, asking whether they might hold communion with something else, like milk and fish. And there was the problem of burial. Priests were few and the distances vast, so the dead often could not be blessed in time. To the Norse, an unblessed corpse was dangerous, something that might rise again. So they would pin the body to the ground with a stake until a priest could finally come, remove it, and lay the dead to rest. Life on Greenland left its mark in small and surprising ways. With almost no trees, wood was precious and furniture was scarce, so people spent much of their lives crouched on the floor. That even changed their clothing. Unlike other medieval trousers, Greenlandic ones had no back seam, because a seam there would not survive a life spent squatting. At its height, the colony held perhaps 5,000 people, enough that a distinct Greenlandic language had begun to form, a cousin of Icelandic, and nothing like the Inuit tongue spoken there today. Then the world began to change, in two ways at once. From the west, out of the direction of Alaska, a new people arrived, the Inuit, skilled hunters who followed the whales. For the first century, the Norse and the Inuit barely crossed paths. But then came the Little Ice Age, a long, brutal cooling. As the cold deepened, it pushed the Inuit south, into the lands of the Norse. And it began to make the Norse way of life, farming and herding on the edge of the ice, almost impossible. The old legends of both peoples tell of bloody clashes, and this has left a lasting image of the Inuit sweeping down and wiping out the Norse. But modern historians believe those stories are badly exaggerated, and in part invented. At the sites where the Norse were supposed to have been massacred, archaeologists have found no bodies, no burning, no signs of a battle. What they have found instead are signs of trade. The likeliest truth is quieter, and in its way sadder. The Inuit were simply better suited to survive the frozen world that was closing in. For the Norse, the end came slowly and hard. The excavation of one farm tells the story. First, they slaughtered the dairy herd they depended on. Then they ate their dogs, and in the end, some simply froze when the fuel ran out. And the wider world was abandoning them. The Black Death swept through Europe. Norway lost its fleet in a war, and with it, the ships that had been Greenland's lifeline. By the 1400s, contact had ceased entirely. One of the very last pieces of news from the colony was a report of a witch being burned, the kind of thing that happens when frightened people go looking for someone to blame. For 3 centuries, Greenland fell silent. And then, in the summer of 1721, the outside world came back. The man behind it was Hans Egede, a Norwegian pastor gripped by an obsession with Greenland. He spent more than a decade pressing the Danish and Norwegian crown to fund an expedition, and at last he sailed. He landed and founded a settlement that would grow into Nuuk, the capital of Greenland today. Denmark had long considered the island its own, even placing a Greenland polar bear on the royal coat of arms. But in truth, all contact had been lost for centuries. The records had literally burned in old wars. Egede was sailing toward a place his kingdom claimed, but no longer knew. And Egede sailed with a strange dream. He believed he would find the lost Norsemen, the descendants of Eric the Red settlers, still clinging on somewhere on the island, and bring them back to civilization and to God. He would have been astonished to learn they had been Christians all along, and probably dismayed that they had been Catholic. But there were no lost Norsemen to find. There were only the Inuit. And so Egede turned to them, opening a school for their children and translating religious texts into the Inuit language, with the Inuit themselves helping him do it. He is remembered today as the Apostle of Greenland. But colonization did not run on schools alone. Sometimes the methods were stranger. In 1728, the king took 12 demoted soldiers, ordered each to marry one of 12 convict women, and shipped them off to settle the new land. And to control the island's real value, its seals, walrus ivory, and whale oil, the crown did what crowns did. It created a trade monopoly. a single company was given the sole right both to trade in Greenland and to govern it, and the Inuit were forbidden to trade with anyone else. Over time, the island was sealed off almost completely. By 1758, outsiders were forbidden to come within 20 miles of its coast, except in emergencies, and even then, they were to leave as quickly as possible. When the monopoly company eventually faltered, the state simply took it over, running Greenland as a kind of royal corporation. And the island stayed closed to nearly all outsiders, well into the 20th century, a policy later justified as protecting the native people from European disease. But a closed island is not the same as a safe one, because just as Greenland seemed settled as a quiet Danish possession, the rest of the world started to want it. First, a puzzle. The second colonization was Danish, but its driving force had been Norwegian. So why did Greenland end up Danish at all? The answer runs through Napoleon. Denmark and Norway had been a single united kingdom, but in the Napoleonic Wars, their king backed the losing side. In 1814, Norway was stripped from Denmark and handed to Sweden, but the colonies, including Greenland, stayed with Denmark. Sweden was a great power, and no one wished to hand it strategic points in the northern seas. Denmark was considered minor and harmless, so the island stayed Danish, almost by accident. Then came the Americans. In 1823, the United States declared the Monroe Doctrine, warning European powers away from the New World, which is to say, this hemisphere is ours. And American eyes soon turned north. The same statesman who bought Alaska, mocked at the time as Seward's icebox, also proposed buying Greenland from Denmark. Congress thought one frozen wasteland was quite enough. Decades later, in 1910, an American diplomat dreamed up a plan of dizzying complexity, a three-way swap of Greenland, the Philippines, and territory in Europe. It was too complicated and too likely to fail, but the fact that it was even discussed says everything about how badly America wanted the island. And yet, for a long time, one question kept Greenland safe. What was it actually for? Sealing and whaling were hard, dangerous work, and the whale oil that once lit the world was being replaced by cheap kerosene. Old sagas whispered of vast riches in the ground, but rumors written down centuries after the fact are a poor reason to seize a country. Then, in the mid-1800s, prospectors found something real, a deposit of cryolite, a mineral crucial for producing aluminum. Mining began in 1865, and for the first time, Greenland held a resource the modern world genuinely needed. That rising value did not go unnoticed. In 1931, a Norwegian explorer and a handful of companions landed on the empty east coast of Greenland, raised the Norwegian flag, and declared the region a Norwegian colony, naming it, of all things, Eric the Red's Land, after the exiled killer who had started it all. Officially, it was a private stunt. In reality, the Norwegian government backed it. The dispute went all the way to the International Court in The Hague, and in 1933, the court ruled for Denmark. Norway withdrew. And with that, Greenland became, at last, definitively Danish. Definitively Danish. That is, until the largest war in history reached even this frozen edge of the world. In April 1940, German troops marched into Denmark, and in 6 hours, it was over. But Greenland, across the ocean, was another matter. Canada eyed the island's cryolite, essential for wartime aluminum, and moved to protect the mine. Britain took an interest too, and that alarmed Washington. So the United States stepped in and occupied Greenland itself to keep it from the Germans and from its own allies. Remarkable, considering that in the spring of 1940, the United States was not yet in the war at all. The legal basis was thin. When an American official asked what right they had to occupy Greenland, the answer was essentially the Monroe Doctrine and little else. But cover soon appeared from an unexpected source. The Danish ambassador in Washington, Henrik Kaufmann, refused to obey the occupied government back home. In 1941, in the name of the Danish king, he signed an agreement letting the United States build bases and station troops in Greenland. Denmark promptly charged him with treason and declared the document void. But it was too late. American soldiers were already on their way, and the island's governor had agreed. What followed was one of the strangest campaigns of the war. Germany could not seize Greenland, but it could slip small teams of meteorologists ashore by submarine to track the weather that shaped the war in Europe. Against them stood the tiny Greenland Patrol, a few dozen men on dog sleds who could actually fight and travel in the Arctic winter, a skill the thousands of newly arrived American troops simply did not have. The battles were bizarre. 2 or 3 skiers stumbling into each other across the empty tundra, trading fire until someone fled or fell. By 1943, the German teams were gone, and the war on Greenland was essentially over. But when that war ended, the Americans did not leave, because a new one was just beginning. With the Cold War came a new reason to hold Greenland. It sat on the shortest path between the two superpowers, straight over the pole. In 1946, the Truman administration simply tried to buy the island outright for $100 million in gold. Denmark refused, but signed a new defense agreement instead, and the American presence grew. In 1968, a U.S. bomber carrying nuclear weapons crashed near a base at Thule. Denmark was officially a nuclear-free country and had never permitted such weapons on its soil. The American position, in effect, was that Denmark had never explicitly forbidden it. Stranger still was a project hidden beneath the ice itself. In the late 1950s, the United States carved out a base under the Greenland ice sheet, kilometers of tunnels powered by a nuclear reactor. Officially, it was a research station, open even to journalists. Its true purpose was kept secret, a plan to hide nuclear missiles beneath the ice, invisible from above, and perfectly placed to strike the Soviet Union across the pole. The plan proved too costly and was abandoned in the 1960s. The world only learned the full truth in 1997, and American forces remain in Greenland to this day. And here, at last, we come back to the part of the story that all these empires kept forgetting: the people who were actually there. Because through all of it, the Norse and the Danes, the Byoffers and the Vases, the wars and the treaties, Greenland was home to a people who never left. Today, around 90% of Greenlanders are ethnic Inuit, the descendants of those hunters who arrived some 800 years ago. As the centuries passed, the pressure to make them Danish grew. In 1953, Greenland stopped being a colony and was folded formally into the Danish kingdom, and the Danish language rose above their own. But equality on paper did nothing to stop what was happening underneath. Some of it was cruel in quiet, bureaucratic ways. For 60 years, into the 1970s, children born to unmarried Greenlandic women were denied inheritance and treated in law as fatherless, a rule that very often shielded the Danish men who had fathered them. In schools, children could be physically punished for speaking their own Inuit language. And in 1951 came the so-called children's experiment. 22 Greenlandic children, some taken from poor families with promises of a better life, were sent to Denmark to be remade as, in the words of the plan, little Danes. Most were left deeply scarred. Many only learned the full truth decades later. And there was worse. In the 1960s and 70s, the Danish authorities, fearing the island's population was growing too fast, ran a secret and unlawful program, fitting thousands of Inuit women and girls with contraceptive devices, in many cases without their knowledge or consent. By some accounts, it reached as many as half of all Inuit women of the time. Investigations into what happened are still going on today. And against this history, the autonomy and the apologies that eventually came can feel like very late and very partial repair. But step back and look at who is still standing. Through 1,000 years in which Greenland swallowed almost everyone who tried to master it, the Norse who vanished, the empires that came and went, the Inuit endured. They survived on an island where nearly everything else perished. They held on to their culture and to their language, so that the tongue of Greenland today is not Norse and not Danish, but Inuit. And slowly, they have been taking their home back into their own hands, moving step by step toward governing themselves. So, who does Greenland really belong to? After everything, the history gives a simple answer. It belongs to the people who stayed. This channel is about looking a little more closely at the moments that quietly shape the world we live in. If you enjoy history told this way, stay with us. There is always another story worth telling.